Welcome to the Purpose to Create podcast with Natasha Wright, a business podcast for photographers and creativepreneurs who want to level up as they pursue their purpose to create. Lean in as we connect, inspire, and impact you as you build and grow your business.
I'm so hyped that you're here and listening to today's show. Today's guest is Nathan Holritz. Nathan is the founder and owner of Photographers Edit and the host of Bokeh Photography Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be chatting about a little bit of everything. So get ready for this exciting show with Nathan. Nathan, welcome to the show.
I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. I'm like, I don't even know where to start. So first, we're going to start with, who is Nathan? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I own a company called Photographers Edit. So we offer post-production or editing services to professional wedding and portrait photographers, commercial photographers. And then I run a podcast called, as you mentioned, the Bokeh Podcast, or pronounced in Japanese. I actually grew up in Japan. So in Japanese, it's actually originally a Japanese word. It's pronounced Bokeh.
Okay.
Yeah, we just happen to, if I were to go around saying that all the time, people would look at me like, what are you talking about? So I stick with Bokeh. Bokeh is easier to say. Bokeh Photography Podcast. And we help photographers build sustainable businesses. So the conversations revolve around that idea. And then I just recently started a company called Miilu. And it's an iPhone app that enables photographers and coordinators to create and manage their timelines and shot lists really easily.
Oh, wow.
And that's something that we just launched this year.
Okay. Oh, we're going to talk about all of this because I'm really excited to hear about this. Do you know that we've all been waiting for something like Miilu?
Really? Well, yes. I'm glad to hear it.
Oh my God, this is going to be so exciting. So yes, we definitely have to dig into all of that.
Okay.
But first, let's talk about how you save photographers' time.
Well, I'll tell you, time for me is one of the most important commodities, if you will, in my life. I don't like the idea of having to work 60, 80 hours a week and then miss out on time with my kids, my friends, other family. And so this is a very personal thing to me. Photographers Edit, we do offer editing services, but the primary benefit really is that we give photographers time, right? So the average wedding photographer, for example, might spend 12 to 16 hours on average processing a wedding. And you multiply that out times 20 or 30 weddings a year. And that's just an insane amount of time that they're sitting in front of the computer. So by editing their images for them, they get so much of their time back. That's time they can spend with the important people in their life, doing the things that they love to do. It's also time that they can put into their business, doing things that are going to actually grow their business, because editing images doesn't do that. So that's the significance of time as it relates to Photographers Edit.
Right. And so what made you start Photographers Edit? Did you have a personal experience with editing that made you say, wait a minute, I can do this better?
Well, it was not so much trying to do it. Well, there were certain elements, actually, yes, that I wanted to try to do better than my so-called competition in the industry at the time. So when we started back in 2008, there were only maybe 3 other companies that were offering services, and they were expensive and complicated and not really scalable because they had waiting lists, this kind of thing. So I wanted to come up with a brand that would be more affordable to a wider range of photographers. I wanted it to be simpler to understand, simpler to use. And I wanted to put the company together in such a way that it would be scalable. We'd be able to take on a much larger number of clients. And that was the goal. And that's what we did ultimately. But I was a wedding photographer at the time, and we'd shoot as many as 30 or 40 weddings in a year. And that's a lot of images to edit. And then I'm one of those annoying like OCD people that get too fixated on stuff. And so it took me way too long to edit images. And that was just mind numbing to me. And then I had family. I didn't want to miss out on an opportunity with family to spend time with family. And so ultimately starting a company like this benefited me immediately. But then the end goal, of course, was to be able to serve the photography industry. And ultimately that gives photographers more time as well.
Right, exactly. And let's talk a little bit about your wedding photography experience, because I think it's really important, especially to wedding photographers who may, feel torn about making a pivot in their business because, being a wedding photographer, you have this opportunity to start Photographers Edit. And how did you know when it was time for you to pivot?
It was just looking for an opportunity, honestly. And I think every time you start a business, it's rooted in the idea that there is a problem to be solved or a need to be met. And in this case, there were limited services in the industry at the time that were offering editing. they were limited on multiple levels, as I explained earlier. And so there was an opportunity there. There was a hole in the market that wasn't being filled, and there was an opportunity to step in and fill that. And so we did that. And I think, it's a good lesson just in general for entrepreneurship. It's not necessarily so complicated trying to figure out the next business idea. You just look for an opportunity where there is a need to be met, and then somebody hasn't kind of filled that need or met that need in that particular way. And that allows you to not only launch a service, but to launch a service that's distinct within that marketplace.
Right, exactly. And did you face any challenges when really identifying that opportunity and then figuring out how you were going to really stand out amongst your competitors?
Honestly, it wasn't that much of a challenge to stand out because we were doing something that was different.
Yeah.
And, we speak a lot on the Boca podcast actually about the idea of brand position. And a lot of as a brand strategist, you look at a lot of photography businesses in our industry right now, and they either don't have a distinct brand position, they don't represent an idea that's unique to their marketplace.
Yeah.
Or if they're attempting to communicate that brand position, they're not doing so in a way that's easy to understand, that's clear and concise. Yeah. And so what we did was we were able to come out representing at the time the idea of classic post-production. So while other companies were offering these custom processing solutions, we focused on the classic, the clean, the classic, the simple style that would last for years to come.
Yeah.
What we have since done, you mentioned the idea of pivoting. The industry at one point shifted in a different direction where they were pulling away from offering more custom services, and they were actually offering cheaper services, right? They were trying to sell a lot more services in a monthly subscription service or pricing option. And so we, at that point, pivoted. While our primary competitor was offering a less custom service, we said we moved from classic to focusing on the idea of custom, because we had a lot of our photographers that were already asking for, hey, can you do this thing? And can you add that option and do this and that? That was already happening. And we felt there was an opportunity to go ahead and leverage that reality with the reality that our market was shifting and yet again stand out. And ever since then, really, I guess in the last 5 years or so, we've run on this position of being the custom post-production house for wedding and portrait photographers, for professional photographers.
You just mentioned something that I want to dig a little bit deeper into, which is brand position. Because like you said, you guys have been talking about that a lot on Boca Podcast. How important is it to have brand position? And really, one, what is brand position? And why do we need to focus on having that?
Yeah, it's one of those pieces of the marketing puzzle, right? It's not the only piece, certainly, of the marketing puzzle, but it's an important one. And especially in the middle of a market, which is just full of photographers. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of photographers, right? That's just the reality of the situation. Rather than get fixated on that, and you see a lot of photographers, or at least have in years past, kind of badmouth all of these newbie photographers, or the shoot and burn photographers, and this kind of thing. It's a waste of time to do that. That's just the reality of the market. So if that's the reality, how do we then create some distinction so we can book business more effectively? One of those ways is to have a distinct brand position. Brand position, very simply, is the unique value proposition that we offer our marketplace. Actually, more specifically, just the value proposition. The goal is to make it unique. So a unique value proposition. And I like the phrase value proposition because the focus is on how do we add value to that potential client, or how do we add value to the marketplace? They want a particular thing. And if we figure out a way to deliver that particular desire or that particular need effectively and hopefully distinctly, then we have an opportunity to run a really effective business. But when we talk about having a clear and distinct brand position, I think a lot of photographers, they jump into photography because they see an opportunity and it's something that they're interested in. So they just start shooting. I did the same thing back when I was 20. Here. Yeah, I get it. I understand. But on the flip side of that, again, we have tons and tons of photographers. So if you have a bunch of wedding photographers, you have a bunch of portrait photographers, and they're all saying the same thing. And you've seen this, I'm sure. Like, photographers use the same words and phrases across websites all across the country. And so they're just kind of becoming part of the noise. We wanted to stand out amidst that noise. We need to come up with a message that represents a service that's unique and communicate that in a way that's distinct. And that gives us the opportunity to be able to stand out above the rest.
Right, exactly. And it's really about owning what your secret sauce is
That is definitely another way to put it, owning it, but then figuring out a way to clearly communicate it too, because a lot of photographers aren't the best copywriters in the world, right?
Yeah.
So figuring out how to communicate it in a way that, again, isn't borrowing the same words or phrases that every other photographer in their town is using, that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I just had an interview with a copywriter actually, and we were talking about how to develop your signature voice and stop stealing from your favorites.
Which our photography industry does nonstop. It's kind of funny almost.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, wait, we're just waiting. Will the real you please stand up? Who are you? Like, I think about Eminem and Slim Shady, and I just know where that came from, but will the real you please stand up?
That's brilliant. I love it.
We're waiting. Your customers are waiting for you to show up, right? And which is why it's so important to know what your unique value proposition is. What is that thing that helps you stand out above the noise? What is it that you have to bring to the table that only you can do?
Well, where this conversation gets maybe even a little bit more interesting is if we're honest with ourselves, the majority of us don't necessarily have a unique talent, at least on a technical level as a photographer. When you compare yourself to other people, right? We have the ability to pick up a camera, take a decent picture that has beautiful bokeh because we have a fast lens. We may have some really great external light that we can set up, and we can capture a beautiful photograph. And the reality is that thousands and thousands of other people can do the same thing. And in fact, I mean, I've got this iPhone 11 here. I can take an awesome picture with that iPhone 11 if I want to.
Yeah.
So the idea of coming up with a secret sauce can be a bit of a challenge in that the reality is most of us on a technical level aren't that different. So then we have to figure out beyond the technical, how do we actually set ourselves apart? And one of the things we talk about in the podcast is it's not even necessarily that we are doing something different from another photographer. In some cases, sometimes it's just a matter of being the first one to actually own that position, to actually state it out loud, and then build our brand around that very idea so that the whole experience is a reflection of that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that it is sometimes as creatives, we can't really articulate what makes us unique, right? Which is, like you said, the levels to really understanding what a unique value proposition is. We all do the same thing, but really, where do we fit in all of this, right? We're not meant to fit in, but we're meant to stand out. And really understanding, like you said, your brand position and your unique value proposition will help you get that much closer to understanding your brand position in the market and how you play an important role in showing up for your clients.
Yeah, and I think it's good to start in a kind of a deeper personal level. So taking a step back and say, what do I actually want out of life? And this is not the conversation probably that most would expect, right? You're going to need to come up with a brand position to make your business distinct. But it's actually good to start on a deeper personal level and say, what do I want out of life? Okay, this is what I want in a bigger picture out of life. This is the lifestyle I want to live. This is the kind of money that I want to make. This is the kind of time, the free time that I want to have. If this is the life that I want to live, what kind of business do I need to create in order to support that lifestyle? And if that's the business, if this, my business needs to generate this much revenue and I need to be able to do so only spending, let's say 25 hours a week in order to generate that revenue, in order to have this lifestyle that I want, that is going to help determine the business model that I need to generate, which then determines the target market that I need to go after, which also determines then the brand position, the opportunities or options for the brand position that I choose. Because we have to also be real. There's the part of us that is like, this is who I am, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I want to create a business that's a reflection of me, but the market also will only sustain, this particular service, or there may only be enough people that want to pay for this particular service in the market. That number of people may not support my personal goals. So if that's the case, then I need to go somewhere else. I need to look for actual legitimate opportunity. People are going to pay me for whatever the service is that I'm going to offer. And then within that realm, I can decide how I want to stand out. So if I'm a wedding photographer, the example I always give on the podcast is if I'm a wedding photographer in Chattanooga, which is where I live, I could stand out just right away by saying I'm a black and white wedding photographer for the Chattanooga market. And I could dial it in even further. And I could say I'm a black and white wedding photographer for skateboarders.
Yeah.
So now I'm offering a variation on a service that doesn't exist. I only shoot in black and white. I'm talking to a very specific subsegment of the market, skateboarders. And I'm also naming the location in which I photograph, Chattanooga. And now this is a great example of a brand position because I'm positioning myself specifically in the marketplace as a representative of this very specific idea So that, and if I do that consistently enough, then when somebody says, Nathan Holritz, I've heard of that guy. Oh, that's the guy. He only shoots weddings in black and white. And I think he only works with skateboarders. It's really cool stuff. It's not really a fit for me, but oh my word, his work's incredible. And what's happened there is they've recognized my brand because I've put it out there consistently. But not only that, it's also naturally acted as a filter, right? So the potential client that hears about my brand, they know I only work with skateboarders. It's not a fit for them. Or they know I only shoot in black and white. It's not a fit for them. They go elsewhere, or I can recommend them to some other photographer. But then the people for who that is a fit, just like that, I booked them. There's no question because I've been very, very specific in positioning myself in that process.
Right. And you really stand out in a crowded and oversaturated market.
100%. Instead, what you see is a lot of wedding photographers, and they say some cute phrase about romantic and joyful and this and that, but all these words that other photographers are already using. And, here's the thing. You highlighted the significance of us as an individual, and it is true that we are all in some way unique. But we have to keep in mind that when that potential client lands on our website, they don't know us immediately. And even if we have a really cute 60-second video introducing ourselves, that's nice, but they still don't really actually know us and don't necessarily have reason to book us. Now, if they're a referral, that's a whole different conversation. But if they're landing on our site cold and you need to convince them to book your service, you've got to be able to stand for something, represent an idea that is distinct, that is different than anybody else in the marketplace. And if you've got a clear and distinct brand position that's communicated very concisely, you have an opportunity to more effectively book them as a result.
I immediately thought of Franklin Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Okay.
One of my favorite steps is begin with the end in mind.
Yes.
And you mentioned that at the top of this conversation is you really got to think about life overall and where you want to be. And then you work backwards and say, I need to do this to get there. So I wanted to drop that book because it is a really amazing, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It really is, it's life-changing when you really think about being an effective person, period, steps that you need to take to get there. And I think that helps with brand positioning and really understanding the process and really figuring out how you're going to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, it's intentionality, right? This is another word that we hear thrown around in our industry a lot. Be intentional. And that's cute and it's nice, but if you don't actually do it, then life feels kind of haphazard and chaotic. If you, like you said, you start with the end in mind. If you have these overarching goals that drive literally everything that you do, for me, it's a set of values that I reference regularly. And so everything that I do as an individual, as a business owner, I want those to be a reflection, those activities, those actions to be a reflection of my value set. And they're driven by that value set. Then I know exactly what type of, in the case of being a business owner, what type of photography business I need to create in order to support that value set. In addition to that, like we talked about earlier, how much money I want to make and the life on a daily basis that I want to live. I know what kind of business I need to create to support that. But that's very proactive. That's intentional in nature versus just kind of being like, oh, shoot, there's an email from a potential client. Let me respond to them. I want to be a photographer. There's some other wedding photographers in the area. I want to be one too. That sounds like a really great idea. It's so embarrassing. But when I started my photography business, one of the biggest reasons I even started is because I thought the gear was really cool. So I wanted to buy expensive camera, like this $1,000 camera. It's so cool, That's hilarious. That's not intentional by any means. And so I think if we learn to think on a bigger picture level as photography business owners, it's going to get us so much further on multiple levels, but certainly when it comes to booking the right clients.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So I want to switch gears a little bit because I want to ask, how are you and your business doing in the midst of this crisis? And then 2, what have you learned and what would you do differently going through this experience?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, business has taken a massive hit because our business is centered around serving photographers who are shooting, and photographers are not shooting right now. So we had a kind of a trickle of business, and we'll probably still get a little bit here and there, but we've taken a massive hit. And there's really little that we can do about that at this point. I like to think proactively because I know that if I get fixated on the negative, I'll go to a dark place, and that's not helpful to me or anybody else around me.
Yep.
And so in that regard, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording, I've been spending a lot of time creating content. I already had a podcast and I've recorded over 400 episodes at this point, but probably 30 or so of those have been recorded even in the last 3 or 4 weeks or so. So a lot of content, and the goal there. And again, I'm not just kind of blindly creating content. The overarching goal that's driving that is to add value. I want to add value. At this point, it'd be ridiculous of me to try to, I think anyway, to try to go out and get a bunch of business, beg photographers and try to convince photographers who may have some images left that need to be edited from when they were shooting. Hey, come on, give us those images, because people are struggling. They're stressed out. They're concerned about their finances right now. So instead, my focus right now is on adding as much value as possible. I do this from a kind of a conceptual, philosophical level, because I know, well, first of all, I want that same experience interacting with somebody else. I know how that feels. It feels good when somebody's trying to make my life better. Secondly, I know that just on a kind of a karmic level, if you will, that putting positive out there, adding value and making that a primary focus of my life, it's going to come back around at some point. It may not be immediately. It may be in the future. Who knows? But on a personal and ultimately on a professional level, I'm a strong believer in that concept. I've seen it in action. And so right now, the focus is value, 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 value. And I do that even when we have a business ongoing, but even more so now.
No, I think that it's really important to highlight how you are handling business, and the way that you add value to the photography community is in an amazing way. And I personally have learned so much in my photography journey from Boca Podcast. So I wanted to personally thank you for always creating content, relevant content that really meets us where we are in our photography journey. So I wanted to pause and say thank you for what you do in creating content.
That means a lot. Thank you very much. And it kind of makes it worth it too. Occasionally we get some notes, messages, DMs, emails, this kind of thing that talk about the difference the podcast is making. And I don't want to be part of the noise. We were talking about the idea of being part of the noise earlier. I don't want to be part of the noise. Podcasts are really popular. They've gotten even more popular since I started the podcast. I don't just want to be another voice out there. I want to make sure that we're adding value in a way that actually makes a difference in people's lives. And to our earlier conversation, I think if we're focused on that as business owners in general, it's going to pay dividends. Yes, on the financial side at some point, but in a level of fulfillment that we wouldn't have if we weren't focused on adding that kind of value.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about some ways to how we can run our business during a crisis, right? I think that it's much bigger than COVID, right? COVID is kind of, making us a lot more aware of how to prepare for a crisis, right? We just don't think that something like this will happen. But now that it's here, we can now prepare for if something else happens, our businesses will be able to run and function. So I want to get your perspective on how to run a business during a crisis.
That's such a tough thing. I think there are two big ideas, though, that maybe we can kind of focus on. And again, trying to be proactive in nature. So one would be, while we do have this time, again, it's easy to get fixated on what's going on and be concerned about how that affects our bank account. Totally understandable. I mean, there was a point, particularly early on, at which I was certainly in that headspace. But again, it's no fun to be there, right? It doesn't feel good to fixate on this thing that we can't control anyway.
Right.
So what can I control? Well, I can leverage the extra time now that I have because I'm not running business as normal, and figure out ways to refine my existing business, and then ultimately add, like we were just talking about, add value to my potential client or potential clients to the marketplace. And so my encouragement to anybody listening in would be, take advantage of this opportunity. Listen, again, I understand if you're frustrated, you're down, depressed, you're concerned, you're scared. I get all of those things. Even if you can muster just an hour or two a day where you're taking the time to look at your business on a few different levels, actually. So we talked about brand position, for example. This would be a great opportunity to look at your position, if you even have one at this point. If you don't, work on developing one. If you have one, go ahead and go about refining that brand position, the messaging, make sure it's clear and it is actually unique. It's distinct in your marketplace. That's a great place to start. The next thing that I would do would be to take some time and get your finances in order. Again, I understand that this topic causes apprehension and stress, right? And I speak from personal experience. One of the biggest mistakes that I made as a photography business owner, I shot weddings for over 10 years and generated a lot of money as a result. Sadly, I didn't really walk away from my wedding photography career with money to show for it. In fact, I put myself in a pretty bad spot because I didn't proactively manage my finances as a photography business owner. And so I cannot stress enough that photographers, if first of all, if you don't have something like QuickBooks Online set up right now, you've got this extra time, do that. It's about the best, whatever, $40 a month that you're going to spend. Setting up QuickBooks Online, start to record your expenses. Once income starts to come in again, track that as well. Not only is it going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to doing taxes, quarterly taxes, year-end income taxes, and so forth, but it's also going to allow you to be a more intelligent business owner. We talked about the difference between being a reactive versus a proactive business owner earlier. Being a proactive business owner means being aware of numbers. And that's so, so important. It makes all the difference in the world. And I learned that lesson the hard way. But it's actually fun for me now to look at numbers and ultimately make intelligent decisions based on data rather than just on our feelings. I'm an emotional guy. If I made decisions based on my feelings all the time, I'd be screwed. So using that financial awareness to make intelligent decisions for your business is really, really good. I'll add a side note to the financial conversation too. Start saving. I mean, literally, if it means $1 a day, $20 a month, whatever it is, start saving. I was just having a conversation at the Boca podcast today. I interviewed my friend and photographer, Matt Odom, who I'd had on the show before. He came back on because I was chatting with him the other day and he seemed so chill about this whole thing. And I was like, what can we share with our listeners about this? Because I want them to know where you're coming from. And one of the points that he made, one of the things that he learned the hard way back in 2008 when we were in a recession, was the significance of saving. He said, save a minimum of 15 to 20%, and that's conservative. Of the revenue that you're generating. Because what does that do? It puts you in a place when we run into a tough spot like this, where you don't have to be quite as stressed. You know that you've covered the bases, you can meet your needs financially, and then it frees you up to do the things like we were just talking about, which is to spend time refining your business. So the brand position piece, it's somewhere you can spend time. Certainly financial management, and it's tedious. I get it. I don't like it either, but you're a better business owner for it. Take the time right now. If QuickBooks isn't set up, do that thing. Start entering receipts. Make sure that you've got the QuickBooks connected to your bank account so that you can categorize expenditures as necessary. All kind of geeky, nerdy stuff, but it makes a big, big difference in the end. And then the other thing that I would do, the last suggestion I would make is to take a look at your workflow. And we spend a lot of time talking about this on the podcast, but one of the places that photographers lose a lot of time in the week, they'll tell you, I'm so busy. I work 60 hours, 40, 50, 60 hours. I'm up at night doing this thing and that. Really, probably the main reason behind that, aside from the fact that they're doing their own editing work, is that their workflow just isn't efficient. Yeah. It's all over the place, right? They don't know where this file and that file is, and they've got emails coming in nonstop, and their phone's going off, the computer's going off. It's a very inefficient way to go about managing your business, and you waste a lot of time as a result. I would suggest taking some time to organize the workflows in your business. And it's a big topic. So all I'm going to say is just go check out the Boca podcast. And we have a whole category of episodes there within the over 400 that we've recorded that you can look up that have to do with workflow. We talk specifically about that. And I would spend some time there as well.
No, I love that. And, I thought of another book that I need to drop out there. Have you ever heard of Profit First?
Yes, I have. I haven't read it, but I've definitely heard of it.
Oh, it's so good. You talked about finances, and the first thing I thought about was everybody needs to read Profit First.
Okay.
It is so good. So if you have an opportunity to check it out, you should definitely read it. It was so good. It really talks about what you touched on with the financial piece, really the concept of paying yourself first and really setting up separate accounts so you can keep your money separate and knowing where your cash flow is going so that you can see the profit in your business as opposed to you working and spinning your wheels and you don't see where the money is.
It's crazy. And I mentioned Matt Odom earlier, but Matt was talking today about how much money we make as photographers. Like if you told somebody who just worked a regular 9-to-5 job that you just went and did a 3-hour shoot and you made, $1,800 or whatever, like they'd be like, what are you talking about? I want that job. So we had the opportunity to generate crazy revenue. And I look back at my photography career and the checks that I was getting for thousands of dollars, it just so poorly managed. And part of it was I wasn't ever really trained in how to manage that money. I grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money either. So when I saw a check for $3,000, my eyes get really big and I'm like, oh, it's so exciting. What can I spend this on or whatever?
Exactly.
And so it puts us in this really tough spot. Instead, what's really cool is that we can be really proactive in that financial management. And I think Profit First. I've had that book recommended on the podcast a number of times. It sounds like a really great book.
It's so good. You're going to really enjoy it. And
okay, cool.
when you mentioned getting a check for, $3,000, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what is the craziest thing that you've brought with money that you made? So for example, for me, as soon as I get money, I go out and buy a new lens.
Do you really?
Yeah, I go out and buy a new lens.
Yeah.
And some photography gear or some software. And so I wanted to know from you, what is the craziest thing that you brought with money that you made, as much as you're willing to share? But
Sure. Well, I mean, I stopped shooting full time back in 2012 as a wedding photographer. And now my primary focus is photographer's edit. My guilty luxury, if you will, is motorcycles. So I started riding motorcycles back in 2016? So about 4 years now. And I think I've had 6 or 7 different motorcycles in that time frame. So that's kind of my guilty spend. Now, I don't have all of those motorcycles. I've kind of traded them in and bought other ones and that kind of thing. But I enjoy it. It's a really fun outlet, mentally, physically. It's a big challenge to go to the racetrack and we'll ride on a racetrack. It's been a really fun outlet and very challenging. It's been an opportunity for growth, but it's also a guilty luxury.
No, as creatives, I think that we definitely have to have those, because if not, we're constantly working, making money, but not seeing the money. So I think it's a great way to kind of just be like, this is a great guilty luxury. I love that. I'm going to start using that. I love it. One last question before we go. Has nothing to do with nothing, but when outside opens again, what is one of the first things that you're looking forward to doing?
Riding motorcycles more, honestly, and particularly with other people. That's one of the reasons that I got into riding to begin with, is to ride with other people. So there'd be that, traveling. I mean, whether it's with my kids, we were supposed to go on a big spring break and I was supposed to take them on another trip. I think we were going to go up to Boston. My girlfriend and I talk about travel quite a bit. We talk about going to Italy, like travel. I'm looking for opportunities to do that. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much for being a guest on Purpose to Create podcast. I'm super excited that you are here. And
thank you for having me.
You dropped all the gems. Let's be honest. Like, you dropped so much knowledge. And I'm super excited for our listeners to check out Boca Podcast, because you share some amazing resources with us that I think that we definitely need to check out. So thank you for sharing those resources as well.
Well, and we need to have you on the show as soon as possible. Like, we need to make that happen.
Let's make it happen.
Okay.
Let's make it happen. You ain't say nothing but a word. Let's do
Thanks,
it.
Natasha.
You're welcome. Tell us how we can stay connected to you after the show.
Absolutely. Probably the best way, the easiest way, just follow me at Nathan, Nathan Holritz on Instagram, because I do share my personal life there, but I also talk about, because I think so many of my followers at this point are photographers. I also share about Photographer's Edit. I share about the content I'm producing on the podcast. I occasionally talk about Miilu. And so you can kind of keep up with all of those things there. But then Photographer's Edit, if you go to now I got to spell it out, PHOTOGSEDIT, Photogs Edit, my word. Maybe you can link to it in the show notes, but Photogs Edit on Instagram, Boca Podcast, BOKEH Podcast on Instagram as well.
Okay, I'll make sure to link to all of those things. I forgot to ask you about Miilu. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, just very briefly. So as a wedding photographer, one of the experiences that I had creating timelines or shot lists, but then also managing timelines at times too, because, photographers become kind of the coordinator and the photographer. It was a very complicated process. You have emails back and forth, maybe phone calls, potentially meetings, and then Word docs and Google Docs. And it's a very convoluted process, even in 2020, which is kind of crazy to me, because we have all these other fancy tools, apps, et cetera, that do stuff for us. But this particular issue really hadn't been addressed very well. And so I created this app that is ultimately going to do just that. It makes it really easy to create and then share timelines, shot lists with the other vendors, as well as the clients that are tied to that particular event, whether it's a wedding or a birthday party or, bar, bat mitzvah, whatever it is. You can create, manage the timelines and shot lists really, really easily using this app. And it actually even has a watch app, which is really cool. So if you create that shot list, and then while you're shooting the portraits at the wedding, for example, or even a portrait session, you can very quickly glance at your watch at the next shot on the shot list. You can even check the last one off, and then you go right back to the shooting. It's very, very convenient, really easy to use.
Oh, I love this. How do you spell it? Because I'm trying to figure it out, but I'm just going to ask.
No, it's fine. It's kind of a weird spelling. It's Miilu, Miilu.com. And it's actually based on a Japanese word. So I grew up in Japan. Yeah. And the Japanese word to see is miru. So basically that L, it's like you roll the R, miru. And so it's a play on that word. But Miilu, MIILU.com, and you can learn there more about the app. And then there's a link to also download the app on your phone.
Oh, awesome. So I'm just going to get all the links from you so I can put them in my show notes. So
Perfect.
Make sure that the photographers who listen to this, just everybody in the wedding industry who listens to this podcast, that's going to be an amazing resource for them to have access to.
I hope so. I mean, it's a business, another business that I wanted to create. But at the end of the day, I just want to make sure it's actually adding value. I think this is going to be a really helpful tool for photographers as they begin shooting again.
No, I definitely agree. Oh, I'm so excited to check it out. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you so much, Natasha.
Thanks. Thanks again for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Purpose to Create podcast. Share, like, comment, or review this episode. Check out the show notes at www.purposetocreatepodcast.com and connect with us online at Purpose to Create.